This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is module 9 of 12 of the St. Jude Brain Injury Network Cognitive Workshop. So we have now been together for over 2 months and really hearing you guys come in, keeping us updated on your progress, right? Stimulating activities, keeping us updated with some of the plans that you're making, foresight, that prospective hindsight, thinking ahead to what are the systems we can build in today so that the problems of tomorrow aren't that big of problems. So love that, love that. And so really what we're going to be talking about today are the support systems and relationships. And so we're going to be taking a kind of a more um, service organizational kind of when we talk about support systems and relationships, like what are the relationships amongst all the things that we've talked about thus far, and the support systems, not only just in your family and your caregivers but also in your healthcare providers. Yes, Bertha, you had a question there.
Yes, I do. Did you receive the email about the DOR? And have you heard anything from them? Because I haven't.
Okay.
What should I do?
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so with that DOR, because from what I saw on the date, that was a very recent. It was like a recent one. So you had just submitted a request, and
Yeah,
so if you
I
still
had
have,
to do it twice.
okay,
Submitted a request after the last meeting that you guys had in Sacramento, and
yeah,
then I did it again after you said to send you the email.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, I got that second one, and so from that second one, then I will forward that over to Tanya.
Oh,
And
okay. So I don't need to do anything at this point?
no, I think they said someone will reach out to you. So at this point, and then what I'll try to do is I'll try to
Yeah,
facilitate.
because I'm excited to get started.
That's fantastic.
Thank
Yes,
you.
right. Absolutely. And that's what it's about, right? Being excited to re-engage, right? Re-engage in stimulating activity, right? So perfect. And good morning, everyone who just came in. Perfect. So excellent. So as always, giving a disclaimer, the opinions voiced in this workshop are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect those of Providence St. Jude Medical Center. The content provided in this workshop is for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult with a healthcare professional for advice regarding any medical condition or treatment. And for confidentiality, as it is not mandated, please keep any and all information shared amongst about other attendees confidential and within this virtual room. If any information is shared that makes anyone reasonably suspicious that abuse of a child, elder, or dependent adult is occurring, that I am a mandated reporter and I must break confidentiality in those circumstances. And for Zoom etiquette, please remember to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to reduce the background noise. Um, and if you would like to speak or ask a question, please use the hand raise function at the bottom of your screen. And so otherwise, I'll also periodically ask for questions. Otherwise, please use the chat function at the bottom. And recording wise, as a reminder, these meetings are being recorded as well as each of the 12 morning sessions in this workshop series. There is an afternoon session that is longer than 1 hour and will not be recorded to facilitate discussion amongst ourselves. Should you be more comfortable with attending that later session instead, you may elect to come to one or the other, or switch off, or come to both from week to week to week. The recording will become available as soon as possible, and the recording will only include presenter mode, so no one's video will be shared, and your voice will only be recorded if you speak. So otherwise, please use the chat raise function to answer questions below. So perfect. We are now in module 9. we will be talking about support systems and relationships. And by relationships, we mean the relationships amongst all of the concepts we've been discussing thus far. And by support systems, we are also referring to larger organizational healthcare providers as well, in addition to family and caregivers and other loved ones. So we are here kind of showing here, this is a list from Zhang and colleagues. I've also put out the link in the slides, so you should all have the slides. This is really a kind of a list here that have been discussed by NASHA, which is the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. When I went out to the Brain Injury Conference in Washington, D.C. Last week. So here there are some mismatches between systems that may be and persons with acquired brain injuries. And so in the healthcare system, the current medical system predominantly focuses on acute and subacute care, right? So keeping you alive, addressing any bleeding, any bone breaking of bones, etc. Any acute injuries, for example, right? So any blood that's pooling, for example. However, it does not sufficiently address or cover really any long-term or chronic needs of individuals with brain injury. And that's just the nature of the medical system and really any ongoing or chronic conditions or issues or a reintegration of that is really beyond or I wouldn't say it's beyond, but it's not necessarily the primary focus of individuals in the medical system in like a hospital. So and then that ultimately leads to a number of issues like in the behavioral health. And as we know, there are even some public policies that inadvertently exclude persons with brain injury from accessing publicly funded behavioral health services, right? What you have is a brain injury that's not a mental health condition or behavioral health condition. And so, and then they'll forward you back to your primary care physician or your neurologist, and that'll go back up to the medical system that we just reviewed that said, well, I mean, we don't really uh, focus on any kind of long-term care. So there's kind of a difference, and we've talked about it, right? And then you find yourself going back and forth from like mental behavior health to your primary care physician, and they keep sending you back to each other. And then ultimately you fall through the gap there, right? So residential options, that there are some cognitive as well as some medical specifics that may make survivors of brain injury a unique kind of population relative to something that, like a hospice or, a skilled nursing facility or some other thing that works with a specific other kind of population that a person with brain injury may not be necessarily appropriate for. And if they find themselves in those residential options, may become very dissatisfied, right? To say the least. Same with vocational rehabilitation and brain injury is separate. There's overlap, but it's separate from intellectual and developmental disabilities, even like progressive disorders like Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia. And so things that are a little bit more progressive. And then biological aging healthcare models. These aren't necessarily appropriate for all survivors of brain injury. Some of them may be younger and find themselves in an assisted living facility or a long-term care residence where everyone is a good number of decades older, for example. So ultimately, there are mismatches between the pre-existing systems, right, that are available and persons with acquired brain injury. And by acquired brain injury, I'm also referring to other kinds of brain injury other than just traumatic. So anoxia, hypoxia, loss of sufficient oxygen, etc. So, because of all these mismatches, right, that are in our pre-existing systems, uh, we need to really consider ways that we can take better care of our brain health. We've talked about the five brain health pillars, right? And so here is from Hoag's Pickup Family Neurosciences Institute in Newport Beach. And here they have three, right? And so, which are all represented in the five. So, exercise, they say, take at least 6,000 steps if you can, and get 30 minutes of cardiovascular activity daily. And so that could be in light walks, even just walk, runs, or rolls, right? Adapt the different exercises to fit to be appropriate with with your limitations and level of in your capacity. The second step is, diet. So in with the whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Out with the processed sugars and saturated fats. So anything, that comes in a wrapper, right? There's like doused in sugars, that are like fine, processed sugars, can be beneficial, right? As we talked about, gut brain axis, right? And so in one sense, you literally are what you eat. So be sure to fuel the brain with efficient and healthy fuel, right? And then third that they give is supplements, but please beware, right? And there's we talked about this. There's a whole, there's a that piece that published article on the whole that this kind of um, uh, industry that has risen in the past several years, where it's based on making you feel as if the injury to the brain is permanent, and the only way to recover some of those things are to use their specific supplements, and typically they're very expensive. And so while benign physically, they are not benign financially or ethically. And so, nonetheless, you should really think about really the food, right? The diet. This goes back to the second step. So if you're eating a whole balanced diet, then you should be good. However, if you can't get all of the required omega-3s or B12s, B vitamins for energy from your diet, then maybe you can invest in a simple daily multivitamin, and omega-3 or fish oil supplement, right? That has DHA and EPA. And also, that there are tons of other really cheaper ways where you can get this kind of supplementation without putting yourself in financial stress. Yep, Pam, you had a question there, or you had something there, Pam?
Yes, thank you, Daniel. I wanted to point out there was at a point I was pursuing postgraduate education, and I was going to do my thesis on the benefits of supplements in lieu of traditional Western medicine. And as I started my literature review and research review, I found that because of the lack of regulation in the industry of supplements, there were actually very, very harmful substances in many of the in many of the products. And so it actually changed my decision to pursue that as a subject, because there were actually, there's digoxin in some of them, which is a heart medication, and, plant source substance that
Yeah.
affects the heart. So I'll stop right there. But boy, that was an eye opener, and it makes me leery to
Yes.
have
No,
to be real
and
careful with those. Sorry. Thank you. I'll pass.
No, really important, Pam, and thank you also for what you put in the chat. You know, the current mismatches that we just talked about, they result in fatigue, depression, anxiety, cognitive distortions, which then lead to additional medications, and then as we call them, iatrogenic effects. The medications, they typically come with side effects, right? And then side effects further exacerbate some of the pre-existing fatigue or anxiety, depression, what's happening with my health, and then at least additional diagnoses, which then gives you additional medications. Oh, up this your blood pressure is going up. Take this, and then and ultimately you find yourself a couple years later playing that game, and it's potentially I mean you know, for some people I see that, like, you know, it is absolutely necessary. So if those are medications that you need, please, absolutely. However, for things that, you know, that may not be completely necessary, you'll find yourself in this kind of uh, game that is very confusing to your biological system, right? And so perfect. Love that. Um, and also, before we get into it, another real important part of taking care of your brain health is sleep, right? I mean, you know, like this sleep is a process that clears waste products, right? The lymphatic system that accumulate in the brain, right, during your waking hours, right? These are particularly beta amyloid, which is associated with you know, some dementia processes a little bit, right? And so this is according to also the Hoag's Pickup Family Neurosciences Institute. So sleep plays a role in the endocrine system. We talked about that, right? This endocrine system that produces your hormones like cortisol, stress hormones, your insulin to metabolize glucose or sugars, and your growth hormones. Therefore, it promotes metabolic health and your stress response. So these are really things that are incredibly important. So achieving quality rest is a key part of well-being. So as we kind of talk about, you know, when people talk about good health, they talk about diet and exercise. But really it's when diet and exercise and sleep intersect, right? That's so important, right? And so some solutions for quality sleep. I mean, sleep problems can affect people whether or not they have more serious underlying conditions. So, for example, stress, late night technology use, the blue lights, even like you know, someone in the afternoon session was saying eating a meal too late can cause sleep problems, right? So, but then of course it's all in balance. Like if you don't go to sleep hungry, right? So always if you're going to sleep, you're about to go to sleep hungry, you know, have a light snack, not a full meal, right? Because you may be ready to go to sleep, but your body is digesting, right? And digest is, you know, on the opposite end of the spectrum with rest. So sleep problems often also have a isolating effect because it's at night, and then if you have a partner or family members, usually they're asleep, and that's usually when people will turn to technology use, TV, social media. So you know, and then looking at the time. And of course, activities the hour before bedtime should not involve too much cognitive stimulation, but it's all in balance, right? Reading a book, light meditation, maybe a jigsaw puzzle, and also physical activity is part of our circadian rhythm, right? So having a nighttime routine that starts 1 hour before, right, and then sleeping up the same time every day, all of these things give our brain clues that we're about to sleep, and so that can improve ultimately your system for sleep. So all of these things really is to tie back into some diagram we introduced in the very beginning, week one, right? We were so much younger then. Um, and so in week one, right? So here is a multi-dimensional model, the rehabilitation cube, right? So if we represent here, each of us represent one of these boxes, the one of the cubes here on the right. at the bottom, after the injury, there this neurometabolic cascade, right? And like it can cause disruption in how the brain functions. It can, cause issues in the networks, right? And the networks, those are things like the lymphatic system, the sleep system, right? Our stress, the HPA axis that we're talking about, it manages our cortisol and stress hormones, and all of that is then all those biological changes are then experienced by us as the person, right? So, and like as we experience that, we're not sleeping well, right? And so if we're not sleeping well, we start feeling a little bit anxious and upset and fatigued and groggy and foggy. And then, of course, if our HPA axis is imbalanced, then we feel a whole lot more stress, right? We're not able to process and do away with a lot of the stress hormones, and then that taxes our coping systems, right? And then ultimately, how are we experienced by the people in our lives, right? Our caregivers, our healthcare providers, our family, etc., our neighbors, our coworkers, etc., right? And so in this way, it comes on really from a top bottom up way, is the biology, what happens, and how we experience that as a survivor, and then how the people around us, our system, how they experience us as we experience the changes in our bodies. Then, of course, this is all subsumed over time, right? And so that was a big thing. That was a big theme when I was in DC last week. Was brain injury is dynamic. It's a condition that's dynamic. It changes, right? So all of this whole the needs, the cube, the processes, the capacities, all the needs change from first week, first month, first year, first decade, and they change, right? And so and they change when you change settings, right? So maybe a certain work or a certain job or a certain housing situation or a certain neighborhood uh, then puts differing levels of stress on your system, and then your bodily system's already imbalanced when it comes to some certain things, like you're not able to cope as effectively, or there may be imbalances that could be precipitated by problems in sleep, and then based on your changing settings, those have differing levels of stress that they impose on your system, and then that of course will then change how you respond, right? And it could be fine when you're at home with people that you're familiar with, but when you're going to different places or to a job or a new job or a different situation or a different place, it could cause some significant issues. Yes, ma'am. You had a question there?
I will put future comments in the chat. I'm
Perfect.
so moved to tell you, Daniel, that, I've been with you for 4 years, and this is the first time that I am able to integrate and fully, maybe not even fully yet, but I comprehend this chart and its impact, and I can see actually how that's working in my life. And so I want to take this moment to thank you, and also to pass on to others to just keep on in your journey. It takes a long time, but we
Absolutely.
keep getting better. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Pam. Right? I mean, like I've been showing the graph for 2 years now, right? And each time I get better at describing it, right? So, love that, and you're exactly correct, right? And so, as we talk about, right, we talked about this person environment fit, right? And so, what in some traditional medical models, right, it's the person is broke, they have to get fixed to fit back into the environment, and not really understanding how the environment may need to adjust to better fit the person in the center, with the ultimate goal of attaining the star at the top, which is productive and meaningful activity. And then, of course, right, this is impacted by situational and positional inequalities. And so these are things like access, right? Do I have the funds? Will my insurance cover this? Do I fit eligibility criteria? Right. And then positional inequality is like quality wise in terms of like, yeah, I could get this thing, but then like, if the one service that I could get, they're so impacted, right? I can get one appointment every like 3 months or what have you, right? So the quality is impacted as well. Right. Yeah, exactly right, Pam. So all of these things are impacted by those social determinants of health, right? And so ultimately, what we see is if there is a kind of loss in some of these things, right? There's some differences, right? The political system, right, is really changed there. And then we have the bottom get the healthcare system, the legal system, and so some of the public benefits and the eligibility and exclusion criteria seem to kind of fall by the wayside. Then we can kind of see how everything kind of topples over, right? And then ultimately impacting our capacity to engage in productive activity, right? And so really going back to what we showed probably in week 2 was these stages of care journey after it says TBI here, but really for ABI, acquired brain injury as well, is if there is even a recognition portion, right, where you go through a medical classification and acute care, if you even have a medical episode of care, what happens in here is that in the rehabilitation stage is typically where chronic conditions happen, right? Is because there's so many different pieces that need to fit: endocrinology, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, cognitive recovery, cognitive training, rehabilitation, right? Vocational rehabilitation, recreation therapy, or all these different kinds of therapy that really impact your reintegration. And all of those things are, it's not like a one size fits all. It changes, it differs depending on the needs of the individual person. And so really what happens, it changes. And so ultimately this area here is where people find themselves spending a lot of time in a chronic condition over and over, knocking on doors, trying this therapy, trying that therapy, and then maybe you might be in the right therapy, but you might be with someone who doesn't who may be providing it in a way that isn't appropriate or isn't of the quality that you specifically need at that specific time. So there's all this variability between the therapies that you need, the professionals that you need to see, and then the the different variation amongst the different professionals that you do see, because not every doctor is created really the same, right? Yeah, and Oura Ring is such a great sleep tracker. I mean, yeah, I hands down. And so um, and so really going back now to what we're talking about, right? That chronic condition. If we can see that chronic condition, right? Like we need all these different things. So what happens when we need, like what happens when we get that resource facilitation, right? We get the resources, the supports, the guidance in the healthcare system, the referrals, and then appropriate relationships, supportive relationships, advocacy, right, in the legal system, etc., right, the disability benefits, etc., right. When we have those resource facilitation supports, we can kind of see that those things may be able to be supported, right. And so nonetheless, when we see that, right, ultimately it's going up to what the holy grail, right, of of acute brain injury rehabilitation, right, has been said, like back when in like week 3, the holy grail of acute brain injury rehabilitation is to return back to the community, to return back to productive and meaningful activity, right? That hands down is the holy grail, right? And so ultimately, what are things that we can do? Because we have to really consider, well, what are the social determinants of health, right? Access to care, the quality, the neighborhood infrastructure, economic viability and feasibility, education, and all of these things really need to get considered in resource facilitation in a way that really honors and respects this rehabilitation cue, right? Really needs to respect the brain injury, respect the consequences of that, and really consider all of those things. And so what I come across last week in DC was this is actually called brain injury resource facilitation, right? There's a model for it, right? And so, owing to major progress in the survivorship following acquired brain injury, and so that is a big hats off to our medical providers, right? Owing to the progress in survivorship, right? They're able to better understand what to do in the acute and subacute stages to ensure that there is a capacity for community reintegration, right? So that because of this increased survivorship, there exists a pressing need for the development of systems of care and rehabilitation tailored to acquired brain injury. One of the supportive systems is brain injury resource facilitation, which focuses on having therapeutic, social, and financial resources readily available and easily accessible for persons with ABI. And so part of this, it takes into account your individual strengths and challenges, goal setting, resource identification, coordination, access, utilization, monitoring, evaluation, and continued advocacy. Ultimately, eliminating disjointed approaches of care. Right, and so in the slides, I put the URL, the DOI at the top. Zhang and colleagues, Dr. Corrigan is in here as well. Dr. Hammond is here as well. And part of brain injury resource facilitation is a model that we introduced in week, I don't know, what was that, week 2, maybe week 3, maybe, is the Be Healthy model, right? This is a model of care for chronic brain injury, right? And so these are the core components, right? So we can actually see that this figure here shows that the healthcare system has to incorporate things like clinical information systems, self-managed support, right? So those are support groups, psychoeducation groups, multidisciplinary programs, OT, ST if necessary, psychology if necessary, neurology if necessary, to ultimately create and support decisions, right? And then this is the healthcare system, and then this has got to include the public policy and resources, right? Those are the eligibility criteria, right? And then the supportive environment. Who's in your corner? This could be your family, this could be caregivers, this could be your support group programs, right? And ultimately, the interplay between the community and the healthcare system. And so the core components of the Be Healthy model are at the top. And so education, right? Providing those proactive referrals, community resources, and therapy, psychology specialists, primary care physicians, support groups, access to educational materials, monitor and support not only our health but our caregiver health. Right, that's a huge shout out there to Caitlin, right? Who will be having our first caregiver TB brain injury specific caregiver support group tonight at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you need access to that link, please just put so in the chat. And then we'll get you hooked up, you and your caregiver. And so 2 is to identify emotional and behavioral dysfunction, and really identify those reduce the hazardous activities, right? Like the brain health pillar, right, Berta? The stress management, that mental health, substance use, fall risks, right? All of these are incredibly important to reduce a re-injury and to reduce exacerbation of pre-existing conditions, for example. 3 is so important. We talked about iatrogenic effects, right? Those are those medication side effects, but also number three is so important. Unsubstantiated pessimism about future outcomes, right? And so, and for anyone that was in our support group, like for last year, we had a pilot study for all 12 sites in California that provide sort of brain injury facilitation to the community. We saw that with increased with increases in social integration, we saw improvements in ultimately their engagement in the community. Such an important thing, right? So really, if anything that is a challenge against those it provides some evidence against that pessimism about future outcomes. Brain injury is not a death sentence, right? It's brain injury is recoverable. Brain injury is beautiful, and ultimately, right, with support, it is something that can not only you can recover from, but you can learn a whole lot of lessons from as well. And so, four, prescribe brain injury appropriate treatments. So these are some medications, right, which we'll talk about in the next 2 weeks. Medical issues, vision, vocational rehabilitation equipment, assistive devices. And so that's what I mean by the next 2 weeks. We're really going to be talking about what are some available and brain injury appropriate treatments using Arabi guidelines. So number five, social and intellectual engagement, right? Review time in the community. How much time are you spending in the community, right? And that could be like, productive roles, which doesn't always have to be paid work. Sometimes volunteer work is just as meaningful, just as stimulating, but you don't have to, but there's no pressure, right? You don't have this pressure with volunteerism. You can engage cognitive stimulation, right? Without having to feel the need to like have a supervisor breathe down your neck about whether you're productive or not, right? I'm doing it on my own timeline. Now, whether or not that's productive to your timeline is irrelevant, right? And so we kind of do things on our own timeline here. So, and really develop a plan to engage in valued activities. What do you find important, right? Is community important? What do we like? Where are we going, right? And so number six, engage in brain healthy behaviors, right? We always talk about the five brain health pillars, right? Physical activity, exercise, diet, nutrition, sleep, cognitive stimulation, and the social connectedness, ultimately to support the health and the stress management of your life. And number seven, work in concert with your primary care, right, to review those comorbid health conditions, right? Those things like diabetes, hypertension, hormone imbalance, right? Endocrinology. And so review those comorbid health conditions that may actually exacerbate or cause access disability. Number eight, facilitate communication between survivor, care partners, your caregiver, your family, your health providers, etc. Right? And number nine, right? Evaluate your community barriers and your opportunities. Volunteerism, right? What are the community barriers that get in your way? Transportation, rurality, urbanicity, finances, insurance, etc. Right? Basic living needs like housing, transportation, food, finances, social determinants of health, right? And ultimately to facilitate connections with community supports to help address these needs. And so, as we talk about, right, connecting now, the last 2 weeks, we talked about the emotion cycle, MREG, right? This is out of Mount Sinai, right? A brain injury resource center in New York, right? Their MREG program. We spent the last 2 weeks introducing the MREG program, really introducing the emotional cycle, right? And emotions here in the center are affected by they're triggered by something. When we feel an emotion, we also feel a physical sensation, right? That could be a headache, uh, double vision, blurry vision, like stress, heightened shoulders, muscle tension, those kinds of things. Maybe light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, thoughts. It also triggers thoughts like, oh man, I always have headaches, or I always do this, or this is never gonna get better, or this pain is terrible. I can't wait for it to go away. Those kind of thoughts, right? And then ultimately, all those things are gonna produce a behavior. What do you do? Right? Are you emotionally dysregulated? Are you gonna yell at someone? Are you gonna throw things? Right? And then ultimately, how that's gonna impact the other people that are around you, right? Your family, and then that's gonna burn some bridges, and ultimately that leads back to a trigger. Then that starts a whole another emotional cycle, right? So these are right. I see their head nods, right? These are the things, right? Our emotional cycles affect other people's emotional cycles, and theirs affects ours, and it's one big mess, right? And ultimately, then like where do and then so many problems start to lay on top of each other, that it just becomes a point where like where in the hell do I start? Like there, like where do I start? And so as we kind of come, my hope is when you ever get to that, like where do I start? Hopefully, in the throughout this workshop series, we've kind of impressed upon you that, scaffold it. If it's overwhelming, break it down, to small parts, and then start there, right? And using those strategies, right? And we have a number of strategies for down here, right? So for triggers, you can either avoid avoidable triggers, prepare for unavoidable triggers, or seek out the positives, right? Seek out maybe before doing something that is going to be difficult, that you can avoid, do something relaxing beforehand to kind of prepare for the that, right? And then for sensations, right? If you're having light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, difficulties breathing, right? Or like hyperventilating, slow down, breathe, relaxation, sleep, exercise, activity, right? So those are kind of things that we've talked about. And so all of these different sensations. And I saw Rosie, right? I had a printout, and she had a printout of this cycle, right? So you can always feel free to download this blank cycle with the strategies here at this link. It's in your slides. So as we kind of talk about now, right? Um, uh, we are last 2 weeks we talked about, well, what are some uh, uh, different events that we can do for homework. So last week's homework was to create an emotional cycle, right? To pick an emotional cycle. So is anyone open to sharing their emotional cycle? I see Pam. Yeah, I
Um,
see Pam.
um, the one I identified is I have significant light sensitivity, and
Okay.
in the area that I live, it's a rural area that is becoming more and more populated, and
Uh,
as people come here, eh, um, who aren't familiar with darkness,
yeah.
they put lights up, and then they also it's not just for safety. They use it for what they feel is ambiance and improvement of their property and such, but
Mm.
and also for safety. So but what has happened for me, particularly when I drive at night, um, is I've gotten actually night blindness when I'm driving, and I drive by these houses that it's really, really bright light just for normal people, and then for
Right.
me to come around a corner and then it, shines real bright in my eyes. So that will tend to set me on unhealthy process of thinking. So I get
Huh?
bright light in my eyes, and then I get blindness, and I get frightened. Um,
Mm.
so then my breathing stops, you know, and thanks for highlighting. That's very helpful. And then, then I become very angry, and uh, and then my thinking starts, the thoughts start, so the trigger is the light, and then the thoughts start, and then uh, I can go into the thoughts if you want, but I'd have to curb my language. And then
Yeah,
but
only if you're comfortable. Only if you're comfortable.
okay, the thoughts are, um, why don't people, people come to this area of beauty, but then they want to turn it into the place they came from. And that I feel angry about that. And then, I feel, don't people, think of others, like when I was brought up, I was always taught to think of others first, which
Yeah.
is, I think my parents meant well, but they neglected to teach me to think of myself. But
Yeah.
anyway, but that's like a big value of mine. And so I then, um, in my thoughts, I put that assumption and judgment on other people, aren't they aware of anyone else's concerns, and aren't they, they're not being very respectful, and also then a big one for me is our environment. And like, uh, it confuses the animals, it confuses the insects, there's a study that just came out of Berkeley that has proven that bees get confused by night lighting, and then it
Yeah.
affects their immune system. So then that my brain goes down that path, God dang it, I'm not going to have any peaches this year, and our crops are going to fail. And then, you know, I mean, it goes way out into the
Yeah.
economy and Armageddon, of the destruction of the earth, just because these people's lights are bright, So then my behavior is, I have to actually, now I'm finally able to stop, you know, um, driving real fast, and just trying to get home. And
Yeah.
so anyway, but that anger, I think, lives inside of me, even when I can calm myself down. I need to develop a way of, when I see the lights, just, you know God bless them, bless them, they know not what they do. um I We're all beings on this earth, and we're all living the best way we can. And my opinion is not that important in the big
Mm.
picture. So I think
Yeah.
it has to do with adopting more of a spiritual way of thinking and living. But
Yeah.
the emotional cycle is very important for me until I can become like Jesus.
Yeah, right. And it's a never ending pursuit, right? I mean, Lord, forgive them for they know not what they do, right? And the forgiveness piece is huge, and I remember going through that bout of forgiveness, and so such an important thing. And so and I love how you kind of systematically gone through that, right? So that's perfect. And so when we're trying to deal with emotions, here are some strategies, right? And which we talked about over the last 2 weeks. But first off, right, the lights, right? And so the lights are triggering. And then so that leads to a sensation of like light sensitivity, it's like squinting or light sensitivity. And then that also triggers some thoughts like, oh, don't people know that, like, that could potentially lead to this or that, or that this is a beautiful area, and now you're scaring away the animals and the crops, and things like that, and you start spiraling downward, which we'll get to in just a moment. And so and then ultimately that's creating a feeling of anger, and then
Powerlessness,
yeah,
powerlessness too.
powerlessness, right? And then the behaviors, and in the behaviors that you sent off, I think that actually works off in the kind of highlights the reflexive nature of this cycle. Because then you went to behaviors last, right? When you said, well, if I'm learning to just slow down, right? If I slow down when I'm driving, then my emotions, I can better focus on my emotions, and then that kind of can bring down some of my thoughts because I'm not driving so dangerously and I'm driving more safely, and
I
so
could take
that
deep
helps.
breaths too, because my breathing stops. But now, as you're talking, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it just
Oh no, go ahead.
dawned on me, the sensation of holding my breath, then I could change my behavior of, exhaling and then deep breathing. Um, Sorry to interrupt, but
No,
that'll
that's
be
perfect.
important. Okay.
Yes, incredibly important, right? So I mean, the sensations and the breathing here, right? And so being able to, identify that, okay, at this point now I'm holding my breath. That's the sensation. And if you're holding your breath, typically your shoulders are tense, and then that's also when you're stressed, you're also in that same sort of position, and then which can then further create a whole host of other triggers, and then impact thoughts and emotions. And so, as Kat was saying, we're like that spiral downward, right? That spiral downward, and so perfect. Love that, Pam. Right, and so right? So there's anger. And so also, as we kind of talked about last week, so if we're here at anger, right? We're like here at anger, right? Or somewhere around here, right? Or wherever anger is for you, maybe it might be up here, maybe somewhere here.
Yeah.
Like, and so it's an axis, right? So the y-axis is energy, so high energy to low energy, and then pleasant to unpleasant on the x-axis. So what do I need to do? Right? As Pam was saying, I'm angry. What do I need to do to move this from where I am now to where I would like to go? Right? So what are some things that energize you or bring down your energy, and what are some things that move your that you can do that move your mood from unpleasant to pleasant?
And,
Yeah.
this is so helpful, Daniel. It's like I'm getting therapy in this moment. So um, what I
Perfect.
realize is, what can I do? So I have no control over others'
Yeah.
choices. I can inform, and I can, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a short letter um, about the effects of lighting on wildlife, and also a short letter on the effects of lighting. I mean, I can't even see the stars anymore like I could before,
Yeah.
and that's really important to my spiritual. Okay, so I'm going to compose a short letter about the effects of lighting on wildlife, on our community, and on the night sky. And then I might like look up a couple of very simple research articles regarding those things. National Geographic had a really good one about light pollution. And then maybe a total of 3 pages. And I'm going to start a campaign to post those things on the local bulletin boards. And then I'm going to find out about if I have some other community members that'll help me just post them, or possibly put them on mailboxes. We have those community mailboxes. Okay. The other
Yeah.
thing I'm going to do is write a letter to my board of supervisors, each one of them, about my concerns about this. And then I'm just going to realize that I now, once I do those things, when I see the lights, I can realize, I've done what I can do.
Yeah.
And then also, I want to adopt behaviors of communication where I can convey my concerns without anger or judgment, or too much emotion, so I can represent these causes in a good way to others, and then move. And I'm
Hey,
being kind of
that's
silly, but that's about it. And I have extreme sadness about the earth and how what's happening to it. And so I will need to find a way to deal with that, because there's so many people that I'm not matched with the majority of people in the world that I see, and I'll need to come to terms with that. And
yeah,
so, because being in this emotional cycle, it just diverts me from being effective in other areas. It diverts me
right.
from being in relation to other people in a good way, because it's depressing to me. I think I should have been born. I think I should have been born long, 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 long time ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I'm going off. Okay,
Yeah, maybe
sorry.
you were right. No, but I think that that's beautiful, right? I mean, like I'm channeling the my frustrations and doing so in a way that is regulated and practices effective communication, right? And so these are things, and if I see it, then at least I can say to myself, I've done what I can, I've done my best, and this is what I can do, and so.
And
And
I
same
don't
with
want to be in resignation about it either. That's not healthy for me. I want to be in, a state of acceptance and knowing that we all live in grace, that
yeah,
everybody lives in grace. And because I've lived in this resignation for a really, really, really long time, and it's not healthy. So
yeah,
thank you guys for holding space and for allowing me this. And thank you, Daniel.
yeah. No, and I love that, Pam, right? It's like the acceptance, right? And as we're saying, it's acceptance that I'm doing the best that I can, and acceptance that we're all living in grace, and what can I do to not only voice my concerns in a regulated way, but also build some skills towards communicating effectively and regulating effectively. So thank you very, very much for modeling that, Pam. It's
Thank you,
beautiful.
Daniel.
That has some choice words for you as well. Right, so love that. Berta, you had something there, Berta? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Pam. Pam, I think you're doing amazing. Just the fact that you have realized where you're at and put words to it, and you are trying to take action, you know, that is amazing. Don't forget to write your congressman and the White House about these issues, and the Brain Injury Association of America. Let them know as well. You can call their 800 number or email them at info@biausa. Let them know. Talk to Greg and Heather. They're amazing. Um, but just the fact that you're trying to do something is totally off the charts. You are doing a great job. Keep it going. If you need some signatures on a letter, hey, count me as one, or a petition. I'm totally for what you're doing. I got your back. Keep it going. Be encouraged. You're doing a great job.
Oh
Thank you
man,
so
love
much,
that.
Berta. I didn't even think about it. Like it is for my brain injury. I didn't even think about that, and it could be for all brain injury survivors. And the same with those boom box, boom, 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 like my spine just tenses up when I'm driving, and so maybe in the future, just like litter isn't acceptable anymore, maybe noise pollution and sound pollution could be, considered. Thank you so much, Berta, and I will do that. Thank you.
I love that. Love that.
Thank you.
Man, that's perfect, right? Showing love and really that, as Caitlin just put in the chat, the power of community, right?
Mhm.
As what can strong communities do for neurologic conditions, right? And so we've seen you do a lot for the Alzheimer's community, seen you do a lot for the multiple sclerosis community, and so love that. Kat,
This is a DEI thing too, you know. We need to be considered and included in
in the conversations,
the
absolutely, absolutely.
and the community. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, and so I'm 100% there, Pam. DC, there was like 417 of us brain injury advocates speaking to our representatives and senators last week in DC. So right there with you. So keep it going, keep it going. Kat, yeah, you have something there, Kat?
Mine is, it's a real simple one, but I agree with Berta on what she was saying about you, Pam. You're awesome. Go girl. My question is simply, on the screen, it says, where is your emotion on this axis from intensity and balance? I looked up valence, or how you say that, and it talks about atoms and molecules. So I just wanted to find out what that word means on this screen.
Oh, yeah, excuse me. So, yeah, so great question though. Really great question, Kat. So intensity is like high to low energy, and then valence is yeah, so it is atoms, right? So like in terms of plus or minus, and so that's really what it is from plus and minus, good to bad, right? To really just break it down to good, bad, good versus bad, pleasant versus unpleasant. So we have energy wise on one axis and then valence on the other axis.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Great question, right? So if I ever say some stuff that like, hey, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, then perfect. That's a great time for a question, right? So I love that. Um, and so as we kind of talk about, right, in the flow of cognitive processes, well, I think we talked about this in week 5, but kind of the process from alertness, being alert, sleeping well. These are your spoons to paying attention, right? To them processing. That's the encoding, the storage, the consolidation, or the encoding, consolidation, and storage, which is now memory. And then and then there is the executive functions, right? Which basically uses a whole number of all of your cognitive processing to plan, to organize, to think ahead so that you can change the way that you're behaving in today so that problems of tomorrow aren't that big of problems, right? So here we've talked about over the last nine weeks, we talked about strategies, cognitive strategies, a toolbox to really maximize adaptation. And so, in tandem with our family support group, Fridays here, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. every Friday. We've been meeting every Friday since March of 2020. So, if you're interested, please just also put some in the chat. And then we also now have just started our caregiver group on Mondays, every second and fourth Monday, from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. And all of these is really just to get us to begin thinking about what are the limitations, what are my strengths, what are my interests, right? And I love that, Pam, because she kind of threw that in there. What are my values, right? Because values, if you're not sure what your interests are or your strengths or your limitations, well, then it's all in context to what the things that you value, right? Where do you see yourself? I value nature, I value the earth, I value like the beauty, the natural beauty that doesn't come in a box, or or it isn't, things like that, right? And so ultimately, as we are now also now talking about thoughts, there are, we also want to highlight, well, what are some cognitive distortions, right? And so, yes, and that's exactly right, Pam, right? And using AI, right? Valence, human behavior refers to the pleasantness or unpleasantness of an emotional stimulus. Perfect, right? So making use of your tools there, Pam. Love that. And so these are some cognitive distortions, right? And I think Pam and Kat were talking about like that catastrophizing, right? Where it's like, oh, they and then now the lights, the lights are gonna scare away the animals and the bees, and they're not gonna be able to, to do the things that there are that they're created to do, and to maintain balance in the ecosystem. And then once those all go away, they're unable to do the things that they do, populate, pollinate, populate, and then the ecosystem is going to be unbalanced, and then the ecosystem is going to go down the hole, and then before we know it, like and then before we know it, there's trash everywhere, and then everything starts spiraling downward, right? And then there's a hole's gonna crack in the floor, and it's gonna go straight to hell, right? It's like all these things, right? And so I mean, there's part of it, right? Like there's parts of it, right, that make sense, and we got to think about it. As long as we can identify those as cognitive distortions, that allows us to then now think about them in a different way, right? How can we think about this productively and proactively, right? What are things that I can do that are in my power to kind of bring down some of that? May not completely close the hole to hell, but it might reduce, maybe make it smaller, right? And so these are things that, what can I do productively and proactively to address some of these distortions? And then last connection here is to a model that we talked about. I forget what week it was, but really to identifying, when we talk about the Holy Grail, right? That star at the top of that triangle. This is that Holy Grail, right? The functional outcome. This is the thing that is quite literally the Holy Grail of acute brain injury recovery, right? Is that community participation. And so all of this is going to be impacted by certain things, right? Certain factors like neurologic factors. Like, did you have any intracranial effects, right? Do you have any skull effects? Are there any damage to your cranial nerves or anything like that? Or do you have light sensitivity or what have you? Or yeah, so I mean those neurologic factors, right? And then there could be the physical factors, right? Like light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. Maybe it's due to your pupils not constricting as quickly or things like that. Or it could be headaches that might be an issue related to um, you know uh, calcitonin gene related peptides, right? So these are all the physical factors, maybe unable to walk safely, maybe fine motor, gross motor. Then there are the psychological factors. These are things like fear avoidance, cognophobia, right? Pain catastrophizing. Then there's the objective cognitive, and this is the neuropsych. These are the neuropsychs, right? And so and those are not the same as subjective cognitive, right? These are different, right? And I went to school for a very long time to tell you that those are different, right? And so objective cognitive, right? This is where you might go, or you might have gone already to a neuropsych, right? And all of your objective scores are great. They're average, right? Which is great for neuropsych. They're average or above, right? But your objective thing, like, but I swear, like, I'm having issues here, right? And that's the subjective cognitive. Well, like, what do you report on, let's say, like a symptoms inventory versus how do you perform when it comes to objective neuropsychological tests? Because those they are typically correlated, but not always, right? Those are very different. And all of those things then lead to your functional outcome. Yes, Kat, you had a question there.
I was going to add that, like, I tend to do well on the neuropsych tests, and therefore, nothing wrong with me, right?
Mhm.
What I try to tell the medical people is I've had 20 TBIs now, 13 have knocked me out cold.
Yeah.
That they have knocked my brain silly, but they didn't knock me stupid.
Mhm.
And I can take your hour-long test and I can do, actually fairly well.
Yeah.
They don't care that I've got a blinding headache at the end of that test and it takes me a couple days to mentally recover.
Yeah.
And so I told somebody once that, if I'm in a cast, if I broke my leg, I can probably walk with crutches to my mailbox, right, and get my mail.
Yeah.
And if somebody was chasing me down the street trying to kill me, I would do my best to run.
Yeah.
Although it would probably, assuming that this person didn't kill me, I would do some massive damage, right, to my broken leg and crutches while I'm trying to haul down the street. And it also doesn't mean I could go work at Amazon in their warehouse, you know.
Yeah.
But by gosh, I can walk to my mailbox slowly and with difficulty on crutches with a broken leg. But nobody would say, oh, that doesn't mean there's not something wrong with you. But
Yeah.
we have head injuries that unless we have massive scars,
Mhm.
from our head being cracked open, just because we can function, and I neuropsychs drive me insane because like, well, you're fine.
Yeah.
One actually told me at Kaiser says, well, so if a professional tennis player gets themselves injured, and they go through rehab, they hurt their arm, and they can still play tennis. She says, we just look at the fact that they can still play tennis, maybe not
Yeah.
professionally anymore, but they can still play tennis. So
Yeah.
that's not their problem anymore because they can still play tennis. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, really, I waited 9 months to see this, like the only neuropsych at Kaiser, to be told that nothing wrong with me. So yeah, we can
Yeah.
test well. That doesn't mean it's not a massive struggle in our ordinary life because the tests are like an hour.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's this little tiny snapshot. It's not reality. But I'm preaching
Yeah.
to the choir, so anyway.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, right? I mean, absolutely, right? So, I mean, like these snapshots. So one, right? Snapshots are great. This is just one snapshot in time, right? And so, for that 1 hour, it could be even 3 hours or 6 hours sometimes, right? Depending on like the nature of everything, right? It doesn't, there may be an endurance factor there that's not really considered, or the fact that these neuropsych tests, they are done in a controlled setting, right? They're done in a controlled setting, and things like that, and so trying to extrapolate, right? So those are small snapshots in time, right? And trying to extrapolate that or generalize it to how this person is functioning without considering the various other things, right? Which is partly all these other different factors: neurologic factors, psychological factors, physical factors, right? And then you really have to integrate all of those um in a very artful fashion, and and it's so complicated that it's very easy not to do it, right? Or inadvertently not do it, even though the person has waited 9 months to see you, right? And so, I mean, 100%. I mean, these are things like, and so important, right? Like objective cognitive is just one, right? One piece of this, right? And so the objective cognitive is just one piece, and hopefully with neuropsychs, I think really an important part of the referral or the report that they give back to you is the actually the last page, right? And the last pages, that's typically the recommendations page. And for some, I see some of the recommendations page are, they're short, and they read like they're canned recommendations, and so that's unfortunate. However, there are a lot of good recommendations based on that. So hopefully, you can connect with, or have connected with, solid neuropsych that will provide recommendations that are helpful. Yeah, and so with your values in mind, as we kind of talk about with your values, right? All of this is important for a successful behavior change, which ultimately requires SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So you shared your goal. What was it? And so, if you need assistance with, achieving scaffolding your goals, here is a map of who the green states are ones that provide resource facilitation. California is one. And so there is a network of 12 sites, right? St. Jude's being one of them, Goody House being another one, Mercy being another one in Sacramento. And so really, there are part of goal setting and finding support systems to help you scaffold and connect you to resources with that brain injury resource facilitation is, the persistence. I think all of you all shown fantastic persistence. Like the goals that you have, right? Finding new ways, being flexible to find ways to act productively and proactively, even in the face of some very frustrating and defeating sort of situations, right? And so I remember the learned helplessness elephant, right? The learned helpless elephant, when it was tied, had yeah, Pam, I remember you good neuropsych scores too, right? And so but so that, like finding ways to continue, right? So this baby elephant, it was tied with a rope to a pole back when it was a baby, and even though it's now big enough to break free because of its progress, it stays tied to its leg to this post because it's learned that it's helpless because of the past. And so what did how to teach those with learned helplessness to eventually escape? Well, you need that guidance, that support system, those relationships to grab you and slowly scaffold to move in a productive and proactive direction. So as we kind of close up for today, so just to think about it, what relationships did you invest in last week? And then how did those interactions go? Are there unexplained symptoms showing up when you do these emotional cycles, right? Pam said light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. She's not breathing, right? Is not breathing. I'm getting some muscle tension, or I might get double vision. Like, are there some unexplained symptoms that are showing up in here, right? Either in triggers or sensations or what have you, right? So are there unexplained symptoms that show up as you do these emotional cycles? And so for homework, right? The homework here is to do one emotional cycle every day this week, right? Your choice of event, right? Up to you. And so at the end of the week, read through them and sort of identify any patterns, right? And so the next 2 weeks, module 10 and 11 are all about various treatments and some available community options. And so to download the blank cycle that we just saw with strategies, click this link here. It's in your slides. And then to download the full emotions list. So that way it could help you identify what you're feeling here in the center, right? That list is in that link down below as well. And so thank you. This concludes Module 9 of St. Jude's workshop, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a
Thank you,
fantastic day.
Daniel.
All right,
Have a
bye.
good week, everybody.
Thank you,
All right,
Daniel.
bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.